All right, so welcome to Chapter 5. Let me adjust my camera. There we go. Chapter 5 is a continuation from Chapter 4 somewhat, and that we're still looking at consumers' behavior. This time we're looking at the consumer as in the spectator. So if you remember back, there are three different types of consumers in the sport industry, at least as marketers we look at. The first one is the sport participant, which is Chapter 4. Second one is sport consumer, the spectator, and that is Chapter 5. So number 1 is participant, number 2 is spectator, the third consumer is the sponsor. And so we don't talk a whole lot about the sponsor in this class. That's more in sport promotion. But this class we'll talk a little bit about it later on. So what I want to do is kind of highlight this idea of the sport consumer. If you have time and you feel like looking up, ESPN did a short clip. If you ever heard of the films called "It's Not Crazy, It's Sports," there's a video clip that is produced by them that is about funerals. So you see the screen here. This is actually a image of a funeral. Here on the left is the Pittsburgh Steelers fan. They say this gentleman was a huge Steelers fan, died at his home, and during his conversations his family had with the funeral home afterwards, they said, "We'd love it if we could put him in his recliner chair, turn the TV onto a Steelers reruns, and put a Steelers blanket over him with a Steelers hat." The family really wanted him to do this because he would have wanted it, and so it was a very unique request. But the funeral home said, "Sure, why not? It's not crazy; it's sports, right?" And so you can see here, the Major League Baseball, as well as many other leagues, have now licensed out or given other companies the right to use their logos and their team's logos to provide funeral service items to big fans, spectators. So you can see here the Chicago Cubs urn. Bottom right is a NASCAR casket. They have caskets that are branded to pretty much every Major League Baseball team, NFL team. The question you're asking yourself, or might be asking yourself, is, that's pretty crazy, right? In some ways you're correct. But in a lot of ways, as marketers, we've been able to understand spectators so much so that we offer products that meet their needs even after their death. And so if you have a chance and you feel like watching that video, it's not crazy, it's sports. It's about funerals and those services. So today, what we're going to look at is how do we get people from infancy all the way to that point, and when they pass away, being fans, being spectators. And so we'll look at the consumer behavior of spectators and how that behavior affects us as sports marketers. Throughout this chapter, we'll talk about several different things dealing with, first with this model of spectator antecedents, emotions, and behaviors. So, to start off with, and you may not be able to see this, I'm trying to adjust the screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see this, but at the very top, hopefully they didn't mess up the recording, but at the very top you should be able to see three words. Antecedents on the very far left. Underneath that in parentheses is cognitions. In the middle of the screen is emotional, and underneath that is attachment. And on the very far right is consequences, and in parentheses it has behaviors/responses. I want to walk you through this process that we essentially have found out through different elements of research to understand the consumer. And just like any book, you read left to right, top to bottom. And so we're going to start first with this idea of antecedents. We mentioned it in Chapter 4, and in Chapter 4 it essentially discussed the antecedent state that come from situational factors. But antecedent means comes before. And so this is the cognitions or the thoughts that we have before we actually become attached to a sport team or a organization. And so I'm going to give you the example of me as a Texas A&M fan. I went to Texas A&M for my master's and my PhD. I did not do my undergraduate there. If anybody knows anything about A&M, the undergraduate experience is very intensive, so to speak. Meaning, if you're an undergrad there, in all likelihood, you're a big fan of Texas A&M athletics, and obviously that's not true for everybody, but they have a really good following. And so for me, I did my undergraduate at a Division III school. It was very small. I had some connections to A&M, but not really. And so if you look at this, the antecedent states are the things on the left. So I'm going to go through it, me as a A&M fan. So if you know A&M, you know there's a gig'em, there's a thumbs up, essentially. And so a thumbs up means good. And so in all sense of the word, when I went there in my first semester of my master's, was I an involved person? Well, yeah, because I went to school there. I was surrounded by people that were in school there, and so I was pretty involved in everything sport because I was studying sport management, and so my involvement was pretty high. However, at the time, A&M, specifically their football team, as well as I think their men's basketball team as well, which are the big two, was not doing so hot. They weren't doing well, and obviously that, if it was a positive thing, would impact my identification with the sport. It was attractive to me. I married into a family that were Aggies. My dad went to A&M for his PhD. I had cousins that went there, and so it was attractive for me individually to be an A&M fan. It was a good thing. There was some social prestige that came from that. So the same respect, I had family and friends that went there. So it was kind of a good thing for me to be a part of. And A&M was very distinctive. They were different from everybody else. The gig'em and the 12th man and all of that came from the athletic department. They really changed the game in marketing. And so if you look at this, 4 out of the 5 different antecedents cognition state were positive for me. So I did become identified as an A&M fan. So I went around and said, yes, I'm an A&M fan. We'll talk about burging and corping later. Actually, we already have. But so yeah, I was an identified fan. But did I have a passion for the sport or for A&M athletics? The answer was really no, which part of that had to do with my own personal history with A&M, and there wasn't a whole lot connection there. I did eventually have a passion, but let's just say I did have a passion. Even if I didn't, a lot of the consequences or behaviors that follow that are important to us. So we'll go through it. So for example, burging, basking in reflective glory. This is saying that we won, we did great. I didn't really do that a whole lot. I didn't really tie my self-esteem, and I did say they lost, they did bad when they lost, which at the time was a lot. And so really there wasn't a whole lot of burging for me. One of the positive things is that it was a good thing for me to be a fan. There was in-group favoritism, meaning the students I went and had class with were A&M fans. And so it was good for me to follow the sport and like it. I wasn't seen as being part of the group. I mean, if I didn't, well, there was a community there. Okay, there was consumption behavior. We'll talk about the 3 M's here in a second. But for me, there was consumption behavior. I went to the games. I bought merchandise, shirts and hats and things like that, and I watched it and listened to it on the radio. Watched it on TV and listened to it on the radio. There really wasn't an emotional enhancement for me. In other words, I enjoyed the sport, but if they lost or they won, it really wasn't a big deal to me. So that consequence wasn't great for me. And the last one is the spontaneous behaviors. And you may not be able to see this, but they're aggression, blasting, and physiological responses. So all of those things really didn't happen for me. When they lost, I moved on with my day. Other people that I knew didn't. And so the behaviors for me, a lot of them were not that of showing passion. However, the one thing I did that was very important, at least for A&M from a revenue and marketing standpoint, was consumption behavior. This is what we're trying to get to as marketers, getting them to buy things or do things that bring in revenue for an organization. So as a side note, as you're looking through this model, I won't expect you to know all these different bubbles and different terms. All I really want you to be able to remember for an exam are the top 3 ideas. You start from left to right. Antecedents or cognitions lead to an emotional attachment, which then leads to consequences or behaviors. And ultimately, our behavior we're trying to get consumers to do is consumption behavior, also known as the 3 M's. And so those 3 M's from that consumption behavior model are meeting, merchandise, and media. And so we know that through our research that the more identified fans are, the more passion they have for the brand, the more likely they're going to go to games, events, be part of fan clubs, talk about things on Twitter and Facebook and other social media. These are our meeting. All of these are opportunities for us to gain revenue as the organization. Merchandise buying. So this is the licensed goods. So purchasing shirts, hats, t-shirts, pins, mugs, foam fingers, all of the above that show I am part of being part of that brand, being a fan, all brings in revenue for an organization. And finally, the media consumption. More people watch the games on television, the greater they can charge for their rates, and the higher their broadcasting rights fees will be. And so again, all three of these things, if this is where they can get a consumer to, is the most important, because all three M's are primary sources of revenue for the sport organization.